So we'll just start out with some 2-minute introductions, how you're doing and what things are going on in your neck of the woods. And um, let's see, I need to change this. So I'm Stephanie Schubert. I'm with Pacifica Network. I'm in Ames, Iowa today. Well, most all days actually. And as Cynthia just brought up, we did the COVID Race and Democracy show, and we had a lot of great contributions for that. And we thank everyone who contributed to that show, and we were really pleased with it. And anyone who was not able to contribute that particular day, we have been invited to do more shows in the future. So, and hopefully hi Ursula. And hopefully we'll be able to, I'm gonna mute her phone. Okay. Hopefully we'll be able to have more people in the future. I know this particular show was kind of thrown together really fast because we didn't know what to expect till after the election. So anyway, people who would like to contribute, please keep doing so. When we bring it up in the future, we will be more certain of what the topic is ahead of time. So that will help. And in terms of Iowa, we are, of course, up in COVID cases. I think a lot of the country is up in COVID cases. We particularly have been just had our kids go back to online school for like elementary anyway. I'm not sure about college, but I know that just started like today. So that's where we are. And trying to think of anything else on my part. Since we had a couple new people join us, I'll pass it over to you, Cynthia, and just introduce Steve again to our new people.
Sure. I'm Cynthia Poole. I'm in Albany, New York. I broadcast out of WCAA in Albany. And I met Steve a couple of years ago and we struck up a friendship. And you know, I've been doing a lot of interviews with him over the past couple of years, and when you talked about doing a a nationwide thing on Pacifica, I said to Steve, you want to lend your voice, and he said, of course I do, and Steve, you could tell the rest about your activist friend contacting you.
Sure. Somebody that I really only know from civil disobedience activities in the past and have only spoken to in court, although I imagine we had met each other over 20 years ago when I was attending War Resisters League meetings at their building. Texted me at 5:45 in the morning yesterday to say that she heard my segment on BAI. And so that was nice to get that, to know that there were listeners out there and that somebody who knew how to contact me actually felt inspired enough by that to send me a message that I was on the air, that I was there at 5:45. I'm a musician. 5:45 is not really my time of day. That's somewhere between bedtime and wake up time. So I didn't hear that go out live. Wouldn't know that. That was just nice to know. Yeah, I met Cynthia, I guess, in Rensselaer, right?
Right.
Cynthia, the church, right? I am no longer young. I am 59. I've really been at the activist life going back probably to 1977 when I lived in South Queens near Jamaica Bay, and we did repeated drive-ins to shut down Kennedy Airport to try to stop the Concorde from coming through. And of course, history vindicated that we were on the right side of that issue. I got involved in more broad spectrum political things in college when Jimmy Carter started draft registration when I was at Columbia. majoring in economics. So, I don't want, I just want to say as an introduction, I now live in New Paltz for the last 20 years. I'm in some ways not exactly typical in lifestyle and association of most progressive and left-wing activists, because a lot of my life is centered around a rural volunteer fire department. So if you know any bubble people, that's not me. I spend a good deal of my time out in the pickup truck world, working on life safety with people from that world, where I'm kind of the outlier there in that world. And so I hear a lot that a lot of people with left-wing circles might not have quite the degree of exposure to, and that includes their reactions to the ideas and ideals and the kind of work that we do, which is in most cases a far cry from what most of us would assume it to be. It's actually largely positive, and that's a discussion I think a lot of us would like to have, would benefit from having. Underscoring that electorally, I have always done 2 to 6 times better in Republican majority counties than in Democrat ones in my races. And I think that there's a lot to look at there among working class people who inherently understand that they're working class and just aren't getting a valid message for the improvement of their own lives from mainstream political circles.
Stephanie, I'd like to interject a comment.
Okay.
Steve and I have talked many times about the role of the press in politics. And one of the problems that Steve had in his election, being a third party candidate, was that he wasn't getting the coverage, the media coverage that should have been, for him. And we talked a lot about how the mainstream media disregards third-party candidates, and Pacifica and community radio and podcasting is crucial, I believe, to what's going on now, because of the fact that all of the mainstream media is so big, and so it's one big monolith, and you need other voices, and I think Pacifica is the way to go.
Oh, I think you have a point there, Cynthia. Let's put it on pause, and let's get through the introductions, and then we can bring that up later on.
Okay.
Okay. And thank you again, Steve, for joining us. This is a nice treat to have you with us here today. And I'm going to pass this on to Ursula. How are you doing?
Okay, I think you can hear me now, right?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Steve, I so appreciated your contribution and well, both of you, for making that possible for the program. I really appreciated getting your perspective. And I'm stressed like everybody else is in Iowa, onslaught of virus and Republicans. Stressful.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add? You want to pass it on, or you?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't know who hasn't spoken and who hasn't.
Well, let me check in with Davine. Is Davine there? It looked like you were having trouble connecting. Are you connected now?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I can hear you, so that's a good sign.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I'm having trouble connecting. Well, we had a fabulous celebration, dancing in the streets happening Saturday whenever it was declared that by Associated Press that Biden appeared to be the winner, and it was pretty wonderful and relieving. So I'm fortunate to live in a very progressive town that's like an island in a sea of conservatism. but we're all safe in town here, and it was good.
Build a wall,
Yes.
like the Middle Ages.
Yeah, my husband and I were just talking, and I think the most recent percent that I saw is 57% of white people voted for Trump.
Wow.
And I just can't forgive them. And I'm not going to. God can forgive them, but I don't. So that's my final statement. I'm trying to get a picture up. I don't know what's happened. My computer's acting up.
Well, that's okay. We can hear you loud and clear. So
We feel you, Davine. We feel you. We don't need to see you.
Okay.
let's see. I'm going to pass it on over to Elliot. How are you doing, Elliot?
Hey, Stephanie, I'm doing well. If you don't know, my name is Elliot Fong. I am the associate producer, director at KUCR, University of California, Riverside, in Riverside, California. Right now, I'm at home in LA County, and let's hear the conversation. Great to, hear a lot of different perspectives. And I'll pass it on to David.
Thanks, Elliot.
Hey, Elliot, thanks. I'm David Klon. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, still living out of a few boxes. And yeah, I mean, stress, but I agree with Davine that it was kind of a relief to hear that the people have spoken. And, I still think Biden is the lesser of two evils, but he's way less evil than what's in place right now. So now the work begins. I will pass it on to Matt Murphy.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Murphy. I'm the general manager of WERU on the coast of Maine. We are not quite an island of progressiveness with all red around us, but we are in the red district of Maine. Of the four electoral college votes, we're in the area that gave one to Trump. Saturday, there's supposedly going to be an anti-mask demonstration at supermarkets in the area. That
Awesome.
anti-mask activists are going to go into supermarkets apparently, and that's maddening.
Yeah, and spread the virus, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we have the Maine CDC meets 3 days or does a press conference 3 days a week, and we have our news and public affairs manager attend those remotely and ask questions, of course, from listeners, and then does a report on the station. And it's really, we're getting a lot of good feedback from that. That's something that's going on here, and we're in our membership drive now. So if I have to run away, it's to deal with some pledge drive business. And so I thought I'd drop in and see how people are doing.
Nice. Well, that's a big deal, that fund drive stuff, man. That takes over everything.
Yep.
Does anyone have any? I just wanted to circle back to David too. For those who newly joined us, David joined the GRC meeting, and he said they were talking about once in a while maybe having a virtual meeting with like a speaker. And did they say anything about like who would do the next hosting, or is that still kind of in limbo with the?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was kind of the point of it. That was nothing specific was decided. I mean, at some point, the group of folks are going to have to decide whether we do another virtual gathering or if it's an in-person thing. And I think it was sort of commonly agreed on that there should be some time posts or something, decision-making times during the year, because obviously it takes planning and it takes time for people to make reservations if there is going to be an in-person thing. So nothing specific was decided. I do have to say I left a little early, so maybe they made a little bit more progress after I had to get off the call.
Did they say if they were going to record it?
Oh, I think Sharon recorded it. I think
Okay.
she did.
I'll ask her about that too. I was curious.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, she might have put it up on the virtual GRC YouTube page too. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's what I was thinking maybe too.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, David.
Mhm.
So I know Cynthia and Steve have a topic of talking about media and politicians and gateway keepers. And though I was curious if anyone else had any feelings about the election first, or just
Well,
anything.
I'm very concerned about it. I think there's trouble brewing.
With the wall building and the lawyers and the the firing of the
Well, I think there's a good chance that
military
violence
guys.
is on the road. I think there's this million-man march being planned for Washington D.C. and to support Trump, and that's a recipe for violence. And I think the Republicans are actually being very intelligent in terms of undermining the Biden presidency already. And they're certainly not going to stop until they accomplish whatever they're trying to accomplish. So, and I think we know what they're trying to accomplish more or less. So I think it's still kind of like the Bronco ride down the freeway. Still kind of feels like that, you know? So I don't know. I'm concerned. I think we've got trouble brewing in this country. And I wish I could be more specific, but I don't know any of us can really visualize where this goes next. I mean, I've heard all sorts of theories, but I think there still is a potential for violence if you bring that many people together into Washington, D.C. and, so anyway.
Yeah, or into grocery stores. In
Yeah.
Matt's home
Yeah.
area. It's it's the same thought process, same mentality.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I've got a great deal of concern for that. Just heard about that today on our COVID news update, but and the CDC is aware of it, and they're sending video to store managers on how to de-escalate. I mean, that might help, but who knows how that's all gonna go. But it is, I mean, it's maddening and concerning, terribly. Yeah.
What day is the grocery store thing?
I think Saturday.
Okay, just on the election and reaction to the election, I think that there's the joy of knowing that Donald Trump is not going to be president anymore is unfortunately masking some very significant things that happened in the election that I think are much more practically concerning than whether some version of American brown shirts are going to start behaving violently in the streets. There's some stuff that's right out there on the table right now. And this is something that Cynthia and I were talking about earlier today when I spoke to her, which is that for quite some time now, the political dynamic in this country between the two major parties has had almost nothing to do with the content of their platforms. You know, what kind of solutions are they going to propose for, you know, the ongoing maintenance of a civilization, let alone a crisis like the kind we're in now, has been much less significant than them going out to demonstrate what they can do to stop the other party from achieving power over them. That's really what people want to know. And that's liberal and conservative alike. You know, this is the first time in my life that I could remember that the dominant conversation always seems to be about the word electability. Until I was about 55, I never even heard the word electability. That was not something, you know, and now it's just an automatic term that people default to because the issue for everybody is really about that our problem to solve in the political process, in the electoral arena, is not the problems in our lives, but the problems of the other side. having more control, or our side having more control. And that's how everyone's voting right now. And so in the context of that, and I also found myself, for 5 years, I've been suggesting to people that the status quo of 2015 and 2016 produced simultaneously, as if you look back to, say, the Dennis Kucinich campaign in 2004, that by 2016, the status quo had produced 13.2 million Bernie Sanders primary voters on one side, and a Donald Trump victory on the other side, culminating in a Donald Trump presidency. And so why anybody thought that it would be a good idea to give first billing to returning to normalcy, to returning to those halcyon days of when the whole country decided to overturn itself in upheaval over that. And so what ended up happening is that we were lulled for months and months and months that there was a 35% approval rating on this presidency. And then on election day, what turned out was that 9 million more people voted for him. That's almost a 15% increase than voted for him in 2016. And they were obviously motivated by just one thing, which was preventing the Democrats from taking control over them. Like, there was obviously no policy concern. This election clarified more than any election, maybe 1968 when Wallace bailed out. But in terms of a two-party contest, this election clarified that most Americans are no longer voting as rational voters on policy solutions for the ongoing problems of civilization anymore, and that we're once again an antebellum country divided with its enmity among ourselves, and that's how we vote, and we don't care about policy anymore. And so what I think we're really looking at right now, since the coattails element of it went with Trump, we can't forget that. The gains in the House were for Republicans. They pulled a fast one on us in that 13 of those new Republicans are women. Like, the identity game is collapsing all around us. As I've been telling people for years now, that if identity is your principal weapon, then you're the most easily disarmed warrior in this fight. Because they'll find the Ben Carsons, they'll find the Sarah Palins, they'll disarm that argument, and they've definitely done that. And the liberalism has not responded with significant policy initiatives to recoup from the loss of the identity argument. I think we're in a situation right now where we are going to be ravaged physically and economically by this virus, because it was so easily shifted into the culture war battle. How we reached the point where even a disease, I'm sure if Pearl Harbor happened again, then we would not be able to act, because half the country would be saying, hey, the Japanese aren't so bad, and the other half of the country, this is where we are right now. I'm much more concerned about that this was cemented in the most visible way possible and the most hardened way possible. I think that's a much greater threat going forward. If anybody shoots, they're probably going to shoot about 3 or 4 people over the next 12 months. But COVID-19 is going to take another 200,000 of us. And the legislative process and the way that we elect public officials basically requires the Republicans to maintain the conceit that it's not a big deal, and then requires the Biden centrist liberal crowd to try to nuance some kind of middle ground, when really denying the virus a host is the only way to go while we wait for a vaccine. And I think we're in much more trouble than anyone wants to talk about, and we still just want to be in that glow that Trump personally is going to no longer be president. But Trumpism grew by 9 million votes. 2 more states turned red. 2 more states elected 2 Republican houses of the legislature. We were already at 30. That's gone up. You know what that's going to do to gerrymandering going forward. At some point, the glow has to fade enough for us to get down to brass tacks about what happened everywhere but at the top of the ticket this year, because all of it was bad.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone else have a response for that?
Yes.
Is that you, Davine?
Yes.
Okay.
So I feel, I think it's natural to be jubilant that Trump was not going to be president again. That does not mean that we've got our head in the sand, number one. I think that all of the obstructions that the Republicans could throw at the election was done. And I think it'll be a while before we find out all that they've done or that they did. I think that we were able to dodge an overt dive into fascism by reelecting him, but that does not mean that 57% of people who are okay with children in cages and overt racism and overt approval of the Proud Boys and everything else that points to fascism slash authoritarianism. I think that in my town, we will be ever more vigilant than we ever have in the past. And we've been in situations similar to this before. We were certainly in this situation with the prior to World War II. And eventually, I think things will go the same way that they did whenever we had Fritz Kuhn holding massive Nazi campaigns and meetings in what was the in Madison Square Garden. I just don't think any of us have our head in the sand here at all. So I just want to address that quickly.
Anyone else?
This is Louis Vandenberg. I'm at UCLA today, and
Hi, Louis.
I'm with KUCR, and I also was a Democratic nominee for United States Congress 3 times in the last decade, and worked with Nancy Pelosi and John Kerry and a number of other luminaries. And I don't know this fellow that just spoke, Stephen, but I agree with everything he said. And I think it was absolutely spot on and just a real insightful commentary. I do think that I'm not going to be happy or jubilant at all until Trump is completely gone. There were 2 articles on the front page of the New York Times today on how it looks like he's doing something that you would normally see in a failing state. That is an incumbent losing because the election was rigged, making that claim, and then appointing cronies to key positions in which a coup could be undertaken. So is that thinkable or unthinkable? It's unthinkable for any of us. But for him, I think it's thinkable because he's facing some serious consequences if he loses power. And he's nuts. So we're not safe at all. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Louis. Were you here the whole time and I didn't notice? I'm sorry.
Yes, I was stealthily listening.
Okay.
And wasn't sure I'd speak. I gotta do a medical thing here.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting that I agree with Davine in the sense that I think both things can be true. That, I mean, when Biden won, I felt just a real lift of a weight that I didn't even know how big it was. And at the same time, knowing that the structure of our system has been in place for a long time that really supports like these big, I don't know, propaganda machines and fear mongering, and that's been there forever, and that will still be there when Trump goes. And that, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. How do you how do you untangle that?
I think it's exacerbated with social media because I think they can find each other so much more easily. The ne'er-do-wells can find each other so much more easily, but also we can find each other more easily.
Yeah.
Stephanie,
Yeah, Cynthia.
I think Trump is much more dangerous right now than he was over the past almost 4 years,
Why do you say that?
because he's becoming unglued and he's not used to losing and he sees it all slipping away from him. And if he's that unglued, I'm afraid of what he might do.
I don't know. He's had lots of moments like that where he looked like he was coming unglued, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it could be. It is. It is. It's just scary because you don't know. You know that there's things going on, but you don't know what they are. So it's easy
Right.
to imagine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If it's any comfort to anyone, as a native New Yorker who's been dealing with Trump since the 1970s, he doesn't come unglued. He's like this all the time. This is really him. It's not recent. He's always been this way, as far as I could tell. He's been this way since he got kicked out of his private day school when he was 12 and his father had to put him in a disciplinary boarding school. I mean, Trump is just a fundamentally mentally unsound person. And yet, you know, and not to claim to have any way to actually know what the future holds, but another hallmark of Trump is that he shoots off his mouth, but he never pulls the actual trigger. He always backs away. He didn't invade North Korea, even though he had us all scared, you know, down to our boots that that's what he was about to do. He never actually follows through to the actual big move, because that seems to be outside his limited thought. You know, his thought processes seem to be, how do I feel right now? He doesn't even have like a 60-second window. He doesn't even concern himself with how do I feel a minute and a half from now. His brain seems to be limited to how do I feel literally right this second. That seems to be his entire strategic and emotional windows. And you know, so I take my history of observing him, you know, since the 1970s. He has in fact failed many times. He's failed far more times than he's succeeded. He's had multiple bankruptcies. Even his survival in the other places of his business that haven't gone bankrupt has been something to the tune of a $500 million that was transferred to him by his father. Certainly having everything go belly up is actually pretty routine in the life of Donald Trump. So I'm hoping, you know, that to try to get a little bit of sleep at night, just based on my observation of his psychology that I've been watching for the last 40 years. You know, which is not to say I'm comfortable with any of his supporters, because that's the exact opposite. I think a lot of his supporters are the people that are ready to go to that Charleston black church, that are ready to go to that Pittsburgh Jewish synagogue, that are ready to go to that mostly Mexican Walmart, you know, in Texas. So I don't have any comfort about a certain small percentage of his most venomous followers. But Trump himself, I think he's an all talk, no action type. I think that's one of the limitations of his, whatever his psychological issues are. Let's just like hold on to that while we can.
Yeah, good point. Plus, I don't know if the military would go along with an actual real coup. It doesn't seem, I don't know, that's just me. But anyway, that's a big topic. Anyone else have any thoughts about anything?
Yeah, how does it get fixed? Like, is this just an extreme swing of the pendulum? Or is this really the aberration it feels like it is? And either way, what's it going to take to get our society back on a more I don't want to say even keel, but for
Like on the
people just
same
to
page
be,
with facts?
yeah, or people just to be cordial to each other, and to yeah, and to start talking about policies and not, yeah, get out of this whole identity thing. Okay, I'm waiting for an answer.
Well, I kind of have one, but I've been talking a lot, so I want someone else to go.
Does anyone else have a response?
I think it was there. I think Trump just gave them permission to come out from under the rocks that they were under and express themselves as clearly as they have.
Mhm.
And now we know.
Yeah.
I think it's always been there. I just think it's really clear now. But I don't have any answers.
Well, it's interesting to me that at the same time, well, I'm sure there's a cause and effect here, but at the same time we see all that, we see the racial justice movement and the Me Too movement, and that seems like it wants to pull in a more reasonable direction. And, you know, how do those two things affect each other?
Yeah. Well, you
I
got
know it's more than two, but yeah, go ahead, Steve.
yeah, you got a kind of a big problem right now because you have spokesmen, people that are referred to as kingmakers, even people like Jim Clyburn, who is now expressly up in the face of Black Lives Matter. What an ironic situation for me as a white person to have to witness, as saying that it's the emphasis of people who want to solve the Black medical disparity and people that want to solve the Black police misconduct disparity that are the reason why Democrats lose and Republicans win. And I'm like, well, if that's really true, if you accept that as true, then where is the party for Black Lives Mattering? Where is the political clout for that to ever come? Or is it just something that we pay a little bit of lip service to? Something I wrote today, I was saying that those corporatist Democrats that are saying that, they are not the antidote to conservatism. They're its moat. They're the people that keep movements from getting access to the fundamental change that's needed. I look back at the time in my early childhood, you know, in the election of 1964, Lyndon Johnson got 61% to 38% of the popular vote. He got 9.5 to 1 times the electoral vote. It means that all the states went for him. The House was, what was it? It was like 290 Democrats to 140 Republicans. The Senate was similarly 70%. It was 68 Democrats to 32 Republicans, way more than, you know, well over a 2-to-1 margin. And the black vote, I shouldn't say the black vote, the combined non-white vote for Republicans that year went down from 32% for Nixon down to only 6% for Goldwater. We know that right now the non-white vote this year returned to a 60-year high. 26% voted for Trump, which is an incomprehensible thing, but it's not really incomprehensible if you look at the complete void of policy. The thing about 1964 that we remember the most is that that was when policy was king. That was when people's problems of life were being dramatically intervened into by government policy. We provided a single-payer insurance program for the poor. We provided one for the elderly. We provided a lot of poverty intervention. You know, so much was going on in 1964 that the Republicans really had no way to respond. They had no way to, other than to say, like, no, let's not do that. And so by late 1964, people really were united behind the idea of an activist government. And that's what we need to return to today. We need to say, here's what we're going to do. You know, in my campaign, I pointed out that the real reason that people want to not stay home during this pandemic and deny a host to the virus and actually make it go away like they did in New Zealand and Vietnam and Cuba and other countries is because nobody provided them with an answer for how they're going to eat while we do that. You know, neither Democrats nor Republicans said, here, we're going to stabilize your life. If you stay home, same thing with small businesses, right? We bailed out corporations, but nobody said anything to small businesses. How are you going to stay afloat? How are you going to get through this if you don't go out and have the virus circulating? If we had given people concrete answers to their own sustenance while they quarantined, there wouldn't have been anywhere near the kind of resistance to quarantining that we ended up seeing, where the Republicans were able to say, we're going to let you go back to work. We're going to let you make a living. We're going to let you pay your mortgage. And these liberals, they want you to stay home and starve and end up homeless. Boy, imagine if those liberals had said, actually, we've got you covered. We've got you absolutely covered. We could have had this virus knocked back in 6 weeks' time. So the answer is policy. The answer is concrete policy. And for the concern that people have about once you do it, it's going to be permanent and people are going to react to socialism. You don't have to present it that way, right? Responding to Pearl Harbor wasn't intended to be permanent, right? It's going to end. Things can end. If we get this disease under control, then we can pull back some of these policies. You know, you don't commit in advance to what happens because you don't know in advance the pace at which it's going to work. And so you tell people, look, these are emergency measures. I'm not intending to completely redraw the entire United States of America. I'm intending to respond to an emergency, which we are obviously in. You know, and if we don't solve the emergency, then this whole conversation is moot. You know, and we can revisit whether any parts of these solutions have to remain permanent once the crisis is behind us. And nobody has stepped up to do that. Only, you know, outsider type people like me, minor party candidates, whether it's the environmental crisis, the health crisis, the health disparity crisis that's racially based, all of it, we were not allowed access to the media. So that kind of ties it back to, and when we were allowed access, we got overwhelming responses. So that kind of ties back to what Cynthia said at the beginning and why I wanted to be here. I think if the alternative media that's out there commits itself in the short run, again, none of this has to be permanent, to commit yourself in the short run to policy formulation and distribution of policy formulation into the media market. And you know that we need to take a crisis approach to both the media and to the disease, the environment, and the social crisis that both have been exploited to create, and then revisit if you want to continue on that path only after you've been able to measure benchmarks of success somewhere along the way. I think Pacifica would be a brilliant vehicle to start showing people what media could look like if it actually served in their interest and was less niche market and ratings driven and was actually informing the electorate, you know, on policy questions rather than identity questions. I'd love to see that happen.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, what exactly are you suggesting we do that we're not doing? I mean, it sounds like you have a particular ask because I think people are trying to do that already. So what do you feel is missing?
I think that a much greater proportion of the programming day has to be devoted to policy. I guess it's easy for me to say that because I was an economics major, you know, like I think in terms of, you know, something obvious, like when I started back in 1980, like, what do you mean you're going to expand output by putting all the money in the hands of the producers? You can only expand output by putting money in the hands of the consumers, you know, things like that. I think that if a big part of the programming day was on debunking the policy mythology that's developed over the last 40 years, and in a nonpartisan way, because there's plenty of liberal policy mythology as well, as we've seen. And if people didn't somehow inherently sense it or see it operating in their lives, they could never have voted for a Donald Trump. So I just think a greater proportion of the day has to be devoted to policy analysis, nonpartisan policy analysis, to just bring that information to people and rebuild an informed electorate instead of a tribal electorate. a lot of Pacifica's programming is in a sort of a more niche market, but still tribal oriented. You're sort of informed and aware leftist types, and what seems validating and rewarding for us to listen to. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We listen to the kind of music, we listen to the kind of radio stations that we enjoy. Look, all of that is in it. But I think that it would behoove the country and behoove Pacifica to temporarily move away from the traditional model and devote itself to a broader informing the electorate program. And I think you'll find even right-wing people flocking to that discussion, because I've certainly seen that in my own public appearances when I was still able to make them before COVID closed that particular door and left me at the mercy of the mainstream media. I really think that would be a great editorial decision and management decision, and elevate Pacifica from its traditional niche market to something that makes broader inroads into the general population.
Any other thoughts?
It sounds like a concrete recommendation, and it takes a lot of work. But one thing that comes to mind when we were doing news training at WDRT in Viroqua, is it Bill Williams? Man came from Madison, a journalist, came from Madison to lead us through some sessions, citizen journalism and things like that. And one of the sort of radical proposals he made was, what if you as a station, and he was talking to us at the time, but I've kind of expanded this thought and mulled it over in my head over the years. What if a station did nothing but produce like an hour of programming for any given day, and it was all news and public affairs, and then just rebroadcast that every hour? I mean, how many people listen to the radio for more than a few minutes a day anyway, right? What would you do to your listenership if you've got this lack of resources, but if you could produce an hour of local public affairs programming, and as Steve says, focus on concrete policies and get people talking about that again. Yeah, sometimes I wonder what that would sound like and how it would go over on a radio station.
That's an interesting approach to news. Is there a station that's doing that at all?
Well, I don't know that they're doing it exactly, but there's a broadcast outlet. It sounds like a national network, the Black Information Network, and there's a local station here that is airing it. I think it's either promoted by or maybe owned by iHeartMedia. It's a commercial station, but I tuned into it the other day, and it's relatively new, and it sounds like they're kind of doing that. It's like the top 40 of news, and they just play these 30, 60, maybe 90-second bits, and they're just in hot rotation. And I listened for a couple of hours, and you're just sort of barraged with these pieces, one after the other, and a few commercials thrown in because I think they're so new that it hasn't caught on yet. But it's kind of that sort of thing. It's probably a little bit bigger than that because they've got national syndicated stories, but it's a tight rotation of short little bits.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Is that you, Louis, who just joined us?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Any other topics anyone wants to mention today? Davine, I saw that you had put something in the chat about having something to say. I don't know if we've talked about that yet or not.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Steve, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing kind of any concrete ideas about how you have about how to actually go about doing what you're asking for.
Okay. As it turns out, although I left the airwaves back in February, I suppose, because I didn't feel it was ethical for me to maintain a public affairs broadcast while I was running for office. I had a 30-minute weekly public affairs commentary show on local community radio here in the Hudson Valley in Kingston, New York. It's called Radio Kingston. It's a nonprofit. And what we would do, my host, the guy who runs the station, Jimmy Buff, we would pick a topic, today's topic, and there would be 30 minutes of discussion. I would do investigation into the topic from a policy point of view. For example, when we talked about gun safety, for example, I researched what the education college at the University of Virginia had proposed, a very comprehensive program that focused more on a threat assessment system in schools, rather than to terrify right-wing people with the phrase gun control, and what was measurable and known to have effect that didn't necessarily have that degree of political divisiveness. That was something that I had done in a weekly show. It probably needed about an hour. And I personally could probably do that once a day for an hour. But I think if people, I liked what David was saying before about the idea of, can you put that on at different times during the course of the day, right? If you archive something on the web, and that could be accessible at any time of a listener's own choosing when they click on the link. But if you're actually broadcasting on the airwaves, I think that the idea of having something happen multiple times throughout the day, so that someone could have a shot at tuning in on it whenever they turn on the radio. And then during other parts of the day, you broadcast, we're going to be talking about this issue. We're going to be rebroadcasting our morning segment on such and such, on racial disparity and access to healthcare, and what to do about it at 4 o'clock today. The one that we broadcast at 8 this morning will be something like that. But I think that a comprehensive approach where you literally, rather than going through the entire litany of liberal signifiers of the entire spectrum, pick an issue a day, or even an issue a week, because some of them can really go on. I found that I had much more common ground with libertarians on things than with Democrats and Republicans. You can widen the scope. I think the idea being to put the focus on what is it that the donation system, that the business model of the two mainstream parties, what truths can they not tell because of their business model, because of their $20 billion a year donation ocean that they float on, that they can't put at risk? Like, what truths can they not tell you? And I don't mean conspiracy truths, because it's too easy to lapse into that, but nobody knows about the University of Virginia's threat assessment model that was developed at their College of Education. Nobody knows about it. And they have a beautiful website dedicated to it with thousands of pages of documented evidence supporting the proposals, of research, national research at every level that documents and supports the proposals that they're making, and nobody knows it's there. Like a legitimate research source, not Alex Jones, not, there's tons of this stuff out there. But so much of it is in donor determined third rails for the mainstream parties. This concept that I just spoke about a few minutes ago, about why didn't anybody propose that we'll sustain you while you stay indoors? Why didn't anyone do that? Why, things like that. There's so much of it out there. Pick a topic that has actual academic discourse involved already and established already, that the mainstream media advertising revenue stream won't support, and likewise the two mainstream parties revenue streams also put out as third rails. That can be discussed depending on the scope of the problem. Healthcare probably needs a whole week. Peace. Why doesn't anybody talk about peace? Good Lord. How about spending a 2 straight weeks on our wars and our 800 bases in 130 countries? For me as a firefighter, for example, we've had a really unusual wildfire season, and they could be put out pretty quickly by helicopters, except all the helicopters are in Afghanistan, and Iraq, and on military bases where they have to remain dedicated to that limited service and can never be brought, my God, what if we just furloughed all of those helicopters and impressed them into service for wildfire extinguishment? There's so much that's nonpartisan that could be brought out there for people to understand that our national security is not served, that we've basically got an international corporate police state that is being taxed only to the American taxpayer. That's like, boy, we could talk about this stuff forever. So I would propose maybe a new model that goes issue by issue. I really like what David said about multiple times of broadcast throughout a day. Chop it up a day at a time, a week at a time, so that the public knows, that the listeners know, this is what we're doing this week. This is what we're doing today. And we know you have to work, so you can tune in later when you get home, whatever. Just make it a comprehensive program, as if you were teaching a college course on policy review.
I like what you said about your reference to like a station's archives where somebody can listen to it at their own convenience, Steve. And just following through with the thread of airing things, multiple times a day on the station, it elevates the perceived importance of that topic. If the station thinks it's important enough to air it repeatedly, air it over, or spend a whole week on a specific subject or something like that, and air specific segments multiple times a day, it gives the impression that this is important and maybe I should listen.
Yeah, my favorite archive, which you can find on YouTube, was the amazing 2-hour documentary that Walter Cronkite did on the Vietnam War. I really recommend that everyone go watch that. It's amazing to look back at that and see how much effort the network put into covering every single aspect of the war as their way of illustrating that the war was now determined to be unwinnable, and so that some kind of exit strategy was necessary, that they laid it out from so many different perspectives. The soldiers in the field, the officers in the front office, the families at home, the tax considerations, the level, the strategic Boy, what an amazing documentary. It's on YouTube. Just gave a complete, comprehensive, nonpartisan, nuts and bolts, it almost like watching, how to build a water and sewer system. It was a really technical, well-presented thing, presented in a trustworthy and non-inflammatory fashion. That, to me, is the model of how we actually managed to get this country out of the Vietnam War, how the public became galvanized behind the idea that, that maybe another country is going to become communist, but what can we do? The price of this is not sustainable. We can't, we're going to have to let this one go, right? The public came to accept that. I think that can be duplicated. I really encourage everyone to go look for that. And similarly, earlier in the 60s, it was also CBS that put on that incredible poverty documentary that went into Appalachia, right? You can find that on YouTube also. That's the way to go. That's the way to go. And yes, like David just said, elevate the importance of it to your audience by saying, we're doing a deep dive. Attract people. You're going to listen day by day. You're going to hear evidence. You're going to hear recommendations. You're going to hear discourse, because these are important issues that are now at this point, because of the partisan divide, because of the disease, because of global warming, are actually now existential threats to the future of America. Don't ever shy away from using the term existential threat to the future of America, because that's where we genuinely are. And then say that, but we're not going to be confronting it in a confrontational way. We're going to be analyzing it in a scientific manner, because it's recoverable. Just like the Great Depression was recoverable. This is recoverable as long as we treat it like it's recoverable, like it's something to study and solve.
Well, are you prepared to provide content?
You bet I am. I'm a musician, which means I'm unemployed for the duration.
Okay. Start producing and we'll let me know and we'll start distributing it.
Would love to do that. I'm going to start working on that before the week is out. I don't know if people can put in the chat their direct contact information so I can copy that into an email for myself and save it to get back out to you all.
Sure. Yeah, we've done that before.
Great.
Okay, any other thoughts for today? We've lost a couple people. Okay. Let's see, Ursula's got her info in there. Okay. Oh, David's coming back. That must be a weird glitchy day. I think that's what's happening. Anyway.
I understand that Mercury is still in retrograde.
There you go.
I just wanted to follow up with Ursula's comments, specifically to you, Steve. Do you understand Ursula's role here?
No, I don't.
Ursula is the director, manager, boss of
Network manager.
the Pacifica Affiliates program, which is all the stations that aren't directly owned by the Pacifica Foundation. And so
Okay.
Ursula coordinates communication like this Zoom call, and also content dissemination to several hundred stations around the country. So she's definitely the one that you want to stay in touch with regard to distribution of your content.
Thanks,
Great to
David.
know. Thank you.
And Stephanie is her associate. Stephanie's the organizer of this call today. So.
Okay.
And I see Ursula's got her email up there, so wow, looks like that we're good. Thank you, Steve, for joining us today. It was nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
it was great hearing your thoughts and
Yeah,
chatting with
look
you.
forward to hearing from you.
I appreciate the invitation. This is really where my life is at right now. So I'm going to be as helpful as I can.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll think about what you said.
Yeah, it really struck home. I was watching on public TV this noon. The Minnesota State Legislature is meeting or met in special session to talk about a bill that would limit the governor's emergency powers. And again, I said to Tamara, my partner, is like, nobody's talking about how to help the people who are affected by these stay-at-home and restrictive orders. Nobody's talking about, like you said, Steve, making sure that they can eat and that they don't have to worry about their jobs. That the most important thing right now is for everybody to stay away from each other Wow. Yeah, let's just talk about restricting the governor's powers.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, well, it looks like we got a good starting point here we can jump off from if we want to. Um, so on that note, I'll say thank you again to everybody for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
Great, thank you.
Stephanie,
Yeah.
I just want to also mention I sort of dropped the ball on the production that I offered to do for.
Oh, that's okay. I was gonna, it was my job to reach out to you and we got so, I think it would have been hard to outsource stuff to you at that time.
Okay.
It was kind of really, I don't know, it just all got compacted
Yeah,
into one day. So
it did seem kind of chaotic. Anyway, I
yeah,
apologize for not following up. And
no, that's okay.
you
I
know,
will look forward to, are you still available on the 17th for our
yeah, definitely.
transfer for the listserv? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good. That, we probably will need you for that one.
Yeah,
Well,
David,
hopefully not.
we have another person that wants the confessor. I just like, for the second time, I've lost his contact information. So as soon as I figure it out, I'll let you know, okay? This guy's been like really, really nice about waiting.
Okay.
And I'm just like, sometimes you just blow it over and over again. So I need to figure out who he is and I'll get it to you as soon as I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to see all of you.
All right, good to see you too. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Thank
Bye.
you, good night.
Take care.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks for your content for the show.
Thank you. You guys, I'll see you next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.